Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Hittin, the Trail for Hallelujah Land, released in 1931. It's the 20th in the series and it's directed by Rudolph Ising. It is also the first in the infamous Censored 11 series of shorts. This particular print comes from Steve Stanchfeld of Thunderbean. Now, in case you haven't seen this one, and look, it is in the public domain, however, I'm not going to put any of the Censored 11 shorts in full on these videos, but in case you haven't seen it, essentially, Piggy's girlfriend ends up going on a boat, there's a lot of singing and dancing, there's a few bits of mischief here and there, and Uncle Tom ends up going to a cemetery where he's spooked by very familiar looking skeletons, if you're familiar with the Silly Symphony series. Okay, so being in the public domain, the full audio commentary is actually still up on the channel, but just to make things consistent, this has now been re-edited into a review, so you'll hear the original thoughts from me, plus some new thoughts, and thoughts from my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie tenor, who will go through the musical elements of this short, so grab some popcorn and enjoy. Now this cartoon is the second and final appearance of Piggy, at least in this form. And it's also a notorious cartoon, as it is one of the so-called Censored 11. I do like how he gets out of this, how he just gets that little leaf and turns it into a propeller. That's pretty clever. Now here we have a scene that's actually quite reminiscent of the Skeleton Dance, which was Walt Disney's first Silly Symphonies cartoon, which is one of my personal favorites actually. I think it's a great cartoon. But here it just feels like it's a bit of a knockoff. I personally don't think this one is as bad as some of the others that we'll hopefully eventually get to in this series of commentaries. But I can definitely see why some might see it as problematic. But this villain just seems to come out of nowhere and try to kidnap Fluffy. I do have to agree with Blue in his last comment there. The cartoon is a bit of a mess, but to be fair, cartoons released this early, and we're talking 1931 here, weren't exactly deep. Now, I'm oversimplifying things here, but essentially cartoons were written on the fly. They just made the gags one after another, put together and called it a cartoon. It was really Disney in the early 30s that came up with the storyboarding process, and then after that, that's when cartoons got better story-wise. So for example, at the end you see this random villain just pop up, there's no indications of where he's come from, what his motivations are and all of that, and he just comes in at the last minute and they end up getting rid of him in the last minute as well, in the most painful way possible, and they just laugh it off. But that should show that, yeah, these shorts at the time really weren't planned like they would be much later on. And speaking of Disney, I mean, the early 30s were full of Mickey Mouse knockoffs, and of course Piggy is no real exception. It's funny how before this you had Foxy, and Foxy was discontinued, allegedly as a result of Disney stepping in saying, hey guys, can you knock it off? And then again they came up with Piggy for two shorts, who was essentially the same thing, but instead of a fox, it's a pig. I don't know, I just think it's quite hilarious. We even get two further knockoffs with Piggy here basically doing what happened in Steamboat Willie with an extra gag right there, and we've got Uncle Tom who's in the actual cemetery. And I gotta say, comparing the two animation styles between the Skeleton Dance, which came out a few years earlier, to this one that came out in 31, and yet the Skeleton Dance looks so much superior, and that just shows how great Ub Iwerks was when he animated that previous short. So the Uncle Tom character here is based off of the character Uncle Tom from the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, I will be going into the history of that in the upcoming review for Uncle Tom's Bungalow that was directed by Tex Avery, as that short, I guess, more or less follows the rough story that was in the books and the stage plays, versus this one where it's really just an old character that's named Uncle Tom. As far as its place in the Censored 11 list goes, this short is notable for two reasons. One, it's the only short that Harmon and Ising did that's on that list, and two, it's the only black and white short on that list. And now for the musical portion of this review, as it is a Merry Melodies cartoon, I take you over now to my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie tenor himself, where he'll discuss the history behind the songs featured in this particular short. So, take it away, Manny.
It's time for Manny's Music Time with music trivia for you today. Hi everyone, this is Manny Cruz, the Toonie tenor, coming at you with some musical trivia for the 1931 Merry Melody, Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. So, it's been a while since I've seen this cartoon. I mean, I've seen it several times. I remember when I first got into this hobby of doing Warner Brothers research over 20 years ago, I received a videotape. I believe it was a videotape from Thad Komorowski, who I actually saw not that long ago at New York Comic Con. And he sent me a videotape with cartoons in the Central 11, as well as some cartoons with the World War II propaganda. And this one was on that tape, so this is probably going back 2001, 2002. But when I started doing a chronological binge of the Warner Brothers shorts, I saw this one in 2018, so it's been a while since I've seen it. So let's talk about the music in this cartoon. So there is not a lot when it comes to the cues themselves. According to the cue sheets, the only songs on it are Get Happy, the Merry Melodies theme, which we all know at the time, Camptown Races by Stephen Foster, the title track Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land by Rube Bloom, and Just a Blue-Eyed Blonde by Ted Fiorito. So with the title track itself, this is the only known recording of it. There is no commercial recording of the title track. One of the things I enjoy about doing these commentaries as well as the musical ones is that I have an aspiration of one day being able to track down the sheet music, or maybe the actual scores that Frank Marsalis and Carl Stalling and Norman Spencer and Milt Franklin had the opportunity to work on. And I know with the older composers like Marsalis and then later on Norman Spencer, this might be a little more difficult, whereas Carl Stalling is considered the legend of this particular field in music for animation, so that'll be easier to acquire. So I'll talk briefly about Just a Blue-Eyed Blonde, which I believe is played during the sequence where the characters are dancing on the steamboat, and then you have Piggy dancing on the corner, and he's trying to impress Fluffy. So Just a Blue-Eyed Blonde was a popular song at the time when this cartoon came out. It was a popular song in 1931. It was recorded by the group The High Hatters for Victor Records, and I want to spend most of my focus on both Camptown Races and the title track. So as I mentioned before, Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land was composed by Rube Bloom, and here's some information about that composer, which I acquired from the Songwriters Hall of Fame website. So thank you very much for this information. So, I quote, Rube Bloom was born Reuben Bloom in New York City on April 24th, 1902. He was a self-taught pianist, and in 1919 he found work as an accompanist for vaudeville shows. He played for numerous dance bands and jazz groups throughout the 20s, as well as arranging songs for numerous publishing companies. In his later years, he wrote several books on piano methods. Rube Bloom died in New York City on March 30th, 1976. I mean, that's pretty much it for the title track itself. I can literally spend hours and hours talking about not just Camptown Races, but the work of Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster is a very controversial figure in American music history because he composed a lot of music that helped form the canon of American popular music. He was a composer of so many well-known songs like My Old Kentucky Home, Old Black Joe, Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, Beautiful Dreamer, and Camptown Races, which for fans of Warner Brothers shorts, that song is pretty familiar, especially when you think of years later with the frequent use of the song by Foghorn Leghorn in his series of shorts. But throughout the course of time, especially in the past, I would say 5-10 years especially, maybe even longer, where the legacy of Stephen Foster's work has come into question because a lot of his music is rooted in minstrelsy, and they were specifically composed to be part of minstrel shows. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, minstrel shows were performances done mostly by white actors in blackface, putting on skits, shows, comedy, and songs that were racist in nature, and they were dependent on stereotypes of black people, the experiences that they were going through, especially during this time before the Civil War came about, and the reality of being slaves in the American South you know, a lot of these songs that Stephen Foster composed were well known throughout the entire country for over 100 years. I mean, I was familiar with Camptown Races and Oh Susanna and other songs that I learned as a child, not realizing the dark history behind these pieces. And I know that I have experience working as a music educator, teaching elementary and middle school music. And in my experiences learning how to be a music teacher as well as being a student, we heard Stephen Foster songs and we learned them. But now the debate has been popping up constantly where some music educators say doing Stephen Foster music is no longer appropriate because of all the negative depictions that they carry, and just the fact that many of these songs are rooted in minstrelsy. And some say, no, you're being too sensitive, and you know, you could change the words. And this is not an issue that I'm going to debate here, because that's neither the time nor place, because literally I can go on for hours, and it's a very controversial issue in the field of music education and just American music in general. So who is Stephen Foster, for those of you that are unfamiliar? I received this information from the Encyclopedia Britannica, so I want to thank you. And I quote, Stephen Foster, or born Stephen Collins Foster, was born on July 4th, 1826 in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, which is now part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In his experiences growing up, he was not formally trained in music. He always had a natural ability to be musical, and he started composing music when he was a little kid. His musical tastes were influenced by the sentimental music that was sung by his sisters that would later influence parlor songs that he was famous for composing. And he had a very strong influence of black music in his experiences. His family had a servant. They would go to church services with her in her black church. Stephen Foster did see minstrel shows growing up, and he also encountered black laborers where he grew up in Pennsylvania. He achieved success with his parlor songs like Beautiful Dreamer and I Dream of Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, but he's also became huge for the minstrel songs that he composed. Songs like Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground, Old Black Joe, and the one that was featured in this particular cartoon, Camptown Races. Now, even though he achieved success with his parlor and minstrel songs, he was not the most financial savvy person in the world, and he was lacking in entrepreneur skills. He would eventually sell off the publishing rights to his music to escape financial woes, but yet he remained in debt until the end of his life. Stephen Foster eventually died January 13th, 1864, during the height of the Civil War in New York City. Once again, I was saying with the song Camptown Races itself, you hear Uncle Tom sing the song in the cartoon along with Fluffy in the beginning when they're riding the horse, and it's interesting. So when I first saw this cartoon, I was thinking, oh, this one's not as bad as the other ones I saw, you know, cartoons with more overt negative imagery of African Americans and African natives. You know, I'm thinking of especially, it's, you know, a cartoon like Jungle Jitters or Sunday Go to Meeting Time, or the other cartoons in the Censored 11 that featured caricatures of African Americans and African natives. This cartoon, or another one I'm thinking of, is Tin Pan Alley Cats or Goldilocks and the Jiving Bears, where the characters are animals, but yet they have stereotypical features of African Americans incorporated into their character design. And with this one, I'm looking at the characters, I'm like, you know, I see a dog, I see a cat, I see pigs. At first, I really didn't understand the connotation of the imagery, and I'm saying it's not as bad as I thought. But after getting older and learning more about the history of minstrel shows, and especially the whole correlation between the music of Stephen Foster and reinforcing images of minstrel shows in the rural South and antebellum South, and the slavery that African Americans experienced during this time period before these cartoons were made. And what was interesting is in my research, I want to credit especially a book, Tunes for Tunes, that was written by musicologist Daniel Goldmark. And there was an article I was reading that would really help in this particular cartoon, as well as some other ones that I will be talking about during the Censored 11. Southern Fried Foster, Representing Race and Place Through Music and Looney Tunes Cartoons by Joanna Smolko. And this helped in my research. And it goes over, as well as a book written by Daniel Goldmark, going about explaining the history of why, when a character is either black or, you know, themed after that, or why do we always associate songs like Camptown Races or Old Black Joe or Old Folks at Home, also known as Swanee River, and why were these cartoons always placed within scenes that dealt with the rural South or about slavery or any other imagery that invokes African Americans and their experiences. And a lot of that is rooted in the traditions of silent movie accompaniment. So a lot of silent film accompanists were referencing Stephen Foster's songs in their accompaniments. And there was a collection of books, or there were books published by the composer Erno Rapé. I hope I'm saying his name right. That would suggest various pieces of music to set a mood. So, for example, if something's scary or something that was terrorizing, he would suggest something like the Toccata and Fugue by Bach. And he started collecting songs that would invoke a feeling of the South, songs that would refer to minstrelsy, songs that would refer to African Americans on screen, and songs like many of the songs that Stephen Foster would write would be included in these collections of songs for an accompanist to look at. And, you know, when the accompanist is trying to figure out, okay, this cartoon is set in the antebellum South, let me flip through my book. Oh, cool, I'm going to play Old Folks at Home, or I'm going to play Camptown Races to invoke that mood. And that is a tradition that, like I said, was going on for many years in silent film accompaniment. And that's something that Carl Stalling, who was a silent film accompanist in Kansas City, would bring into the way that he would compose scores for these cartoons. Now, Carl Stalling was not the musical director at Warner Brothers at the time. He was, at the time, working for Disney, and then he would later on go to work with Ub Iwerks Studio before coming to Warner Brothers in 1936. Frank Marsalis was the one in charge of the musical direction for these cartoons at the time. But again, that idea was already burned into his brain as well as other musical directors, where if you see something with black characters or something with the South, these are the go-to songs. It's interesting hearing Camptown Races in this cartoon, and then I'm thinking of the most popular use of the song done by Foghorn Leghorn. But what's interesting to note is that in the article that I read, Southern Fried Foster, that by the time Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin no longer did the musical direction for these cartoons, that the habit of using Stephen Foster music in animation was starting to go away, trying to get rid of that baggage of being associated with minstrelsy and things of that nature. For example, when William Lava started scoring the cartoons and he did the 1963 cartoon Banty Raids, a Foghorn Leghorn cartoon, there was no use of Foghorn singing or humming the melody of Camptown Races at all in that particular cartoon. Now, going back real quick to the cartoon itself, I mean, I could literally spend hours talking about the legacy of Stephen Foster, but I know that Anthony's already going to kill me for taking a while to do this commentary as well as editing it. So sorry about that. I want to shout out in particular a book I just got recently, Cartoon Voices of the Golden Age, 1930 and 1970 by Keith Scott. My goodness, thank you so much, Keith, for the efforts you did in tracking down these voice actors from the cartoons of the Golden Age. So there's a few that I want to mention. So for Hittin' the Trail to Hallelujah Land, you have Johnny Murray, who was a radio star at the time in LA, doing the voice of Piggy. Rudy Eising, very interestingly, doing the voice of the villain. Ah, me fair beauty and the crocodile. And the book states over here on page 6, it says, the Kingsmen Quartet and the Rhythmettes Girl Trio provided choir work and odd voices in these cartoons. So around this time, 1931, when the Merry Melodies were starting to get into their swing, you're going to see the Kingsmen appear a lot. So they sang the title song, Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. And one of the members, Ken Darby, did the voice of Uncle Tom in this particular cartoon, a white man doing a stereotypical black voice. So a little bit about the Kingsmen themselves. And I quote, this is coming from the All About Jazz website, because it was a little difficult to try to find information for this particular iteration of the Kingsmen, because clearly that's not a popular name for a vocal group. So they formed in 1929 when Paramount Pictures were recruiting a quartet for the film Sweetie with Nancy Carroll, and they had an established group by 1934. Now, the Kingsmen were contracted to do songs in the Warner Brothers shorts, in particular the Merry Melodies, but 1934, they were locked in when they became an exclusive group with Paul Whiteman, the king of jazz himself. Ken Darby himself, who did the voice of Uncle Tom in this cartoon, he went on to do many things. He worked for Disney. He worked doing compositions for The Wizard of Oz. And he was a member of the quartet before going on to do many things in film scoring. And he passed away in 1992. He was born in 1900. So these are my thoughts and Manny's music time for Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. Yeah, it's interesting going back and revisiting the Censored 11 after a while, especially this first one. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all enjoy. And take care, and so long, folks.
Thank you, Manny. So, first of all, While this short isn't particularly great, there are some elements I do enjoy from it. In particular, the late 20s, early 30s style of animation and the timing to the music, which would have been enjoyed by many in the times of the Great Depression, seeking an escape from their rather dire circumstances. Despite the problematic elements that many just mentioned, I do enjoy the music here, and it's definitely a highlight of this short. And to be frank, this short is also amusing unintentionally in parts, with some very frankly blatant copying of what Disney had done up until that point. Out of the Censored 11 shorts, this one is easily the tamest in terms of visuals, though it does rightfully belong on the list due to the use of the term Uncle Tom, which is a term used to describe someone who's a subservient person, and given that it's clear he's acting in service to Piggy's girlfriend here, one can see the issue. And since you can't edit out the Uncle Tom character without affecting the whole short, I can see why this ended up on the list rather than be edited. In the end, this short gets a very low 3 out of 10 for me. I mean, it's honestly very forgettable, especially when compared to some of the other harmonizing merry melodies of the time that are actually quite fun, like Lady Play a Mandolin and Smile Dania Smile and all those ones. So yeah, this one was definitely a letdown. But that'll do it for the first of the Censored 11. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, take care.